Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this series, we're going to be talking about predatory publishers. We are nothing without academic integrity, and predatory publishing practices threaten to undermine a scholarly communications environment that, these days, needs public faith and trust more than ever. My guest and I will be discussing the motives, archetypes, and deceptive practices of predatory publishers, so stay tuned in this four-part series for some valuable intel to help you safely navigate the academic publishing landscape. Joining me on this series, which is brought to you with generous support from Cabells, are Ashley Carroll, Project Manager at Cabells, Ruth Bailey, Journal Auditor, Michael Bisaccio, Director of Marketing and Communications, and Yasmeen Zubair, Journals Manager at Cabells. I should note that the Cabells team recently presented a webinar with Choice on predatory publishing, which is freely accessible on demand at the Choice Media channel on YouTube. In this second episode of our series, my guests and I look at the ways in which the academic market is particularly vulnerable to predatory publishers and the tactics they use to lure unsuspecting researchers into their journals. Why does there seem to be room for predatory journals to operate? I mean, what makes, the journal market vulnerable? And Ruth and Ashley, let's jump over to you for those.
Yeah, I think basically, like all markets that operate in the online sphere, the conditions are there for potential bad actors to exploit. The growth of online journal models means that journals can set up a website really quickly, relatively easy. Online submission sites are easy to manage, and authors are used to submitting their work online. They don't need to have a physical address for authors to submit articles to. Also, with the growth of open access, it's not an unfamiliar thing for authors to be asked to pay an article publication charge.
Right.
And also, I think the ability for journals to kind of send out bulk emails to sort of spam authors within any discipline and say, submit to our journal. I think the amount they can send means that they'll then get at least somebody replying, and it's been very little effort on their part to then get an author sort of hooked into the journal.
Ashley?
Yeah, and to echo something that Ruth was saying earlier, is that you have certain fields that have higher publication requirements than others, and in particular, that would be science and medical fields. Not only do they need quicker publication turnarounds, but there's a lot more data that's being churned out too, and so it can be challenging for non-experts to identify falsified data, particularly because scholarly articles use field-related jargon that can sound authoritative and yet still be fluff. Another aspect of this is that there is no central authority that's really monitoring predatory publishing. You have organizations such as COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics, and you have Think Check Submit, and you even have Cabells that are all working, to combat predatory publishing behaviors. But there's no panacea. There's no central authority that's really just focused on this. And as Ruth pointed out, it's so easy to create a website, to turn out these emails, to really set out the bait and hook, line, and sinker authors into publishing with their companies.
Right. So sometimes we talk about, impact factor and the which, authors tend to want to publish in a journal that has, a high impact factor but it's sounding like not all authors are really using that as part of their search for where they want to publish into. So, I mean, I'm wondering is that just kind of so predatory publishers are tending to be more successful, as you said earlier, with authors who need to publish quickly, who may not be caring so much about where it ends up, I guess. I mean, because I'm thinking like if a publisher has just set up a website, and there's no real existing body of work that they've already published, that seems to me as an author that might be a pretty big red flag.
Yeah, I think one of the things that predatory journals do is lie about impact factors. So they will badge their journal and say, yes,
Oh,
we're
okay.
included on this
Right.
indexing service. And again, it's something that's very easy to verify. So if you went and looked on Clarivate Analytics, you would see that that journal didn't have an impact factor, but they
Mm,
can make it look so kind of professional that you might think, oh, that's okay. That's, it's an accepted journal, or it's on Scopus, or they might create a list of indexing sites that look vaguely acceptable if you weren't willing to look sort of dig further into it. So they're very good at creating a picture of an acceptable journal. I mean, obviously there is, there may be some that don't have that, and there is the appeal of publishing really quickly, but
mm,
they're just good at mimicking acceptable journals. And I think
yeah.
that's where people might fall down if they don't know where to verify that information.
Okay. Or if they don't go into it with a little bit of skepticism, I guess,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so you mentioned science and medical disciplines. What are some of the other disciplines that predatory journals and publishers tend to focus on?
Any and everything.
Okay.
One of our journal auditors mentioned that she came across a journal that published everything or tried to cover as many fields as possible. So whether it was science, engineering, but Ruth, maybe this was you that told me that you found a journal that covered telepathy as one of their fields. So I think, they will try to take a pitch anywhere that they can, cover every field possible. And I think that should be a red flag as well, is that if you notice a journal's scope is greater than its title or greater than the number of people that are on its editorial board, or that its expertise could possibly cover, then that should be a massive, massive red flag.
Right. That's a giveaway. Yasmeen, anything you want to add?
Yes, so really the goal here is to cast as wide a net as possible to just rake in those article processing fees. It's definitely a financial decision on the part of the journal, but it can be very amusing to see these long lists of disciplines that the journals supposedly accept articles in. Um, I once saw a journal that had eugenics on there, and it's terrible. It's really not uncommon to encounter very large lists of disciplines like these on
Hmm.
predatory journals.
Okay. And then Ruth, anything more you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, so you can come across a relatively new set of journals, but across such a wide range of just discipline, and the range of discipline isn't necessarily the concern, but it's when you see there's maybe one editor managing all the different disciplines, or it's the same editorial board that's reproduced across those journals. And I think it's just like Ashley was saying, if you see there's not the staff to manage this sort of multidisciplinary journal, and we do get journals that you look at and it's absolutely everything that they'll accept. So one multidisciplinary journal will accept, English literature articles on quantum physics, articles in the wellness field. So just, absolutely anything, but it's got, a supposed editor who his specialty is business and management, and it just doesn't link up to the content.
Hmm. Excellent. Okay. So we've revealed some of the tactics during the conversation, but I'm wondering if you can kind of maybe expand on that. What are some of the tactics you've seen predatory publishers use? Um, and some of these worse than others? And as a researcher is kind of, or subscriber really, are looking at some of these journals. What are they? How are they weighing these tactics? I mean, and Yasmeen, should we start with you on that one?
Sure. So predatory publishers have a wide arsenal of tactics to entice researchers into submitting to the journals. Falsifying information is a key approach. For example, they may falsely claim to be included in respected indexes or databases like Clarivet Analytics or Scopus, even Cabells. They may give false information about their address as well, or the country that they are operating from. We see that fairly often.
Hmm.
Perhaps to meet the needs of certain authors who are asked to publish in English language journals or international journals. And they might offer very quick peer review times or relatively low article processing charges. They also may email potential authors to suggest that if they submit an article as soon as possible, there's time for it to be published in the next issue of the journal. So everything they do is about creating a fake but attractive picture of the credibility and legitimacy of the journal.
Yeah, it sounds like they've really figured out and understand the research workflow and sort of, but also the pressures that are involved in that, and their and the pain points and vulnerabilities, and they're really exploiting those factors along the way.
And if I might add, part of the attractiveness is how easy it can appear for you to get your work published. And I think that's because
Yeah.
publishing can appear or feel like such a daunting process, not only for newcomers, new researchers, but for veteran researchers as well, that if you make it seem as though you're removing all the barriers that would normally be in the way of you being able to access and or publish your work,
Hmm.
then that's really how you get them in, is how easy or convenient can we make this feel for you?
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, so what is Cabell's weighing violations against? So, like, in other words, is there a standardized academic publishing integrity rubric or a set of guidelines? You mentioned there was really no centralized kind of standardization body here, but what is Cabell's really looking at?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there's not an industry standard of how we define what a predatory publisher or predatory journal is, but sort of there's a general consensus on how legitimate publishers and journals should be operating. We've mentioned COPE, so organisations such as the Committee on Publication Ethics, they'll have policy guidelines which will suggest how journals should operate and how to resolve any kind of conflict within the journal publishing landscape.
Mm.
On the Cabell's website, we provide a list of criteria for how we select journals for journalytics, but also why we would include them in predatory reports. And this is done in conjunction with organisations within the industry. We look at the change in publishing landscape and we make sure that we evolve our criteria as necessary to respond to changes. There's also there's databases like the Directory of Open Access Journals, and they have a list of criteria for verified peer-reviewed journals. So there's resources that people can use. It's kind of more of an agreement of how things should be done rather than saying this is absolute proof that something's not operating as it should be, I think.
Hmm. Does that, just curious, does that do you feel like that gives these predatory publishers room to appeal? I mean, if there's no real, are the teeth behind those guidelines and standards big enough, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think what it does is it means because every decision we make in regards to a predatory journal is evidence based. So
Mm.
we have to prove that
Yeah.
we think, that we think this is a deceitful journal. So we would never say, oh, we think they're doing this. We'd have to have concrete evidence of
Right.
the peer review, like, the peer review is incredibly short, or there's clearly been no peer review on this article. We'd have to prove that a journal that says it's in an index isn't. So we would never make a decision that could kind of be questioned on that level. We have to have evidence to because it would be terrible if you put a journal in predatory reports that was actually just a low quality journal or a new journal from a developing country. So it's basically making sure you take each journal on a case by case basis, and that you have evidence to support the decision you've made.
You just heard from Ashley Carroll, Project Manager at Cabells, Ruth Bailey, Journal Auditor at Cabells, Michael Basaccio, Director of Marketing and Communications at Cabells, and Yasmeen Zubair, Journals Manager at Cabells. This episode was brought to you with generous support from Cabells. Join us next week for our third episode on the forensics of predatory publishing, when our guests describe how they evaluate and identify predatory publishers. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.